Pray with me, please. God, open our minds to know you, our ears to hear you, our eyes to see you, and our hearts to love you. Amen. Loss, doubt, discomfort. The first time I remember feeling these feelings was in preschool when I was away from my mom. At the beginning, I was a typical kid who got used to being away from the house, but then things changed. A place that should have been safe, that I deserved to feel safe in, became scary. I would never be the same after I graduated preschool. And although me and my mom are close today, I am still in some ways searching for her. I still feel like I am away from her, and it's likely that I'll always feel this loss in some fashion. Life can be confusing and seem paradoxical at times. The mission of a school at its most basic level is to provide a safe learning environment for children. But the world changes, for good and for bad, constantly. And this means we must adapt with those changes by making changes of our own in order to sustain the mission we've set out on. When I graduated middle school after accompanying Brianna on For Good from Wicked after graduation, a pit in my stomach began to develop. So I was losing my routine, the familiarity of the building that I had spent some 3,000 hours of my life in the last 3 years, the relationships with my teachers, my principal. And summer vacation that year was met with a newfound sadness. Questions of doubt infiltrated my mind. Would I be liked when I got to high school? Would any of the friends I made memories with in middle school even exist there? Would everyone suddenly be older and more serious while I still felt like a kid? Everyone keeps telling me middle school grades don't even count. High school is when it starts counting. Well, does that mean that my classes were too easy and now I'll fail, disappointing my parents and ruining my future? I went to school in the 1990s and 2000s, and there were different needs for different children back then. Today, children's anxiety has reached new heights, and self-image is easier to deflate. The advancements of a technology-driven society, although wonderfully helpful in many ways, has also cemented broader and more far-reaching dark ways to negatively impact a child's self-worth. So in the areas we have control over, we must change the method in which we do things. If the mission of a school is to provide a safe learning environment for children, the methods must change. If the schools that care more about their methods then the mission will fail the children they serve. When I was a kid, my two favorite stores of all time were Blockbuster and Toys R Us. Those stores were absolute fire and dominated the childhoods of 80s and 90s kids. Watching a movie at home was an adventure. It became a whole evening process. First, you'd call your friends to come over from a landline phone, sometimes connected by a cord to the wall. And then your parents would drive you to Blockbuster, and only then would you be able to see the new movie releases and your choices. There was no looking it up online on the way there. It was an exciting unknown. And then you'd pull up and enter with aisles and aisles of VHS and DVDs before you. But just because you made it to Blockbuster didn't mean you'd succeeded yet. You had to hope that everyone before you didn't take all the copies of the movie you wanted to rent. It wasn't like now where it's impossible to run out of stock of a movie because you simply purchase your own digital copy online. Blockbuster only had a certain amount of each movie, and so walls of the newest releases adorned the store, but once those were taken out, all that remained were these cutouts of the size of that movie that once sat there, and you knew you had been too slow. But once you got your movie and your candy, the rest of the night was magical as a kid. Blockbuster had its peak in 2004, if you can believe that, which is not that long ago. They had about 9,000 stores. worldwide and was worth about $6 billion. Just 6 years later, in 2010, they filed for bankruptcy and became a footnote in history. So what happened? Change happened. I mentioned at the beginning of my message loss, doubt, and discomfort. These words are only half of the story. They're the hardest parts of what is called the change cycle. The change cycle is a professional organization that helps institutions and leaders adapt so they remain solvent into the future. As we know, everyday businesses and nonprofits must not only be aware of the changing world, but that they possess the ability to make the changes so that they can function in that changing world. The full change cycle is loss, doubt, discomfort, discovery, understanding, and integration. And as much as I loved Blockbuster, they were unable to reach the discovery, understanding, and integration stage because they couldn't get past their loss and doubt and discomfort. So as the wheels of change turned, they had multiple opportunities to curb their decline, but they could not get past the first stages of the change cycle. They were offered to purchase Netflix while in its infancy, if you can believe this, for a mere $50 million. That's about 1/100th of 1% of the $6 billion they were worth at the time. And as you know, within 5 years, Netflix became the place that families turn to laugh to enjoy a movie, and they're worth $95 billion today. And Blockbuster faded into the ethers of time. Now, what about the church? What about us here at St. Michael's? Are there ways in which the church falls into this trap of change anxiety as well? I touched on the reality of mainline churches in my annual report this past year where I said, and I'm quoting, "The Episcopal Church, along with their 7 sister mainline churches, United Church of Christ, Lutheran, Presbyterian, United Methodist, and American Baptists, as well as Catholicism, have been in steady decline for the last many decades. Although this is not new information, I believe an inflection point has arrived, a prayerful discernment process that includes fearless change, embridled ideas, and smart resources, which will be required for family ministry's version of bringing young families to God to succeed." And I was asked today to talk about this subject, so I am accepting the call to do so. Mainline Protestantism, which is what the Episcopal Church is part of, began in Jamestown in 1607, where the colonists built the first Anglican church in what would eventually become the United States, foreshadowing the Episcopal Church. The church was fundamental in the creation of our country. The 7 sisters founded most of American colleges and universities, spurring economic growth and crafting the concept of American democracy. They were the forebearers of creating tools of social and political reform. And the reason you see so many churches in so many town centers across the country is because at one time, the church was the place to gather for all the laws and all the community gatherings. But the reality is that mainline churches have been in steady decline since 1960, with more dramatic decline in the last 10 years. Membership for these churches combined was 30 million at its peak in 1960. Today, it's less than half that, at 14 million. The data shows a clear and consistent pattern over a lengthy period of time. The rate of decline in the Episcopal Church is about 3% every year. Now, I'm not reporting anything that the Episcopal Church hasn't already widely published. In 2019, the National Diocese published an article quoting the Reverend Dwight Zischel, an expert in denominational decline in Episcopal preach. He said, "The overall picture is dire, not one of decline as much as demise within the next generation, unless trends change significantly. At this rate, there will be no one in worship in around 2050 in the entire denomination." The point of my message today is to shed light on an uncomfortable reality, and I do so because I have a deep affection and love for the mainline church. I not only have worked for these churches for 6 years, but I grew up and was confirmed, was baptized in these churches as well. But the reality of today, the data, does not have to be the reality of tomorrow. And the church separates itself powerfully and distinctly from any other institution. It serves on the rock of Jesus Christ, and with Christ at the helm, there is really no way to fail. But this involves relinquishing power to him fearlessly and passionately. So what should the church do, and how are they going to do it? I'm sorry if I'm disappointing you, but that's not the goal of my message this morning. Something I've seen and observed as I've sat on church councils and vestries from my humble children youth chair is people often go immediately to what and how, and they forget about the why. And it's human nature. If there's a problem, okay, how do we fix this problem? What's it going to take to fix this problem? And let's fix it. Sheila might like a certain type of music. Isabel might like another. Joan may want to paint a room gray, and Dina likes white. Hall may prefer earlier services, but Bob might think evening is best. Erin may like the idea of bringing the church into the community. Susie might want to bring the community to the church. These are all, of course, hypothetical. Then the how comes. How are we going to pay for this? How are we going to get people on board? How are we sure this will work? How long will this take? The problem is that what and how are inherently divisive. Why is what unites us. Why are we proposing changes? Because this isn't about us. Because we imagine a church that our kids and grandkids want to come to. Because we want to be our church our friends love to attend. Because we want to be a place where people who don't feel welcome today feel welcome tomorrow. Because we love Christ and the world for which he died. Because we have a passion for those who don't yet know Christ. Because our current methods aren't optimally helping us accomplish our mission. And it's hard to disagree with those statements. The why appeals to the best in people, and when you focus on the why, you bring out the best in people. Most people are part of this church because at some point they decided to give their lives to Christ and be part of a cause that's larger than them. And we would be wise to remind each other of this every day. When a group of people is focused on the why, the what and how will work themselves out far more easily because why is what motivates us. And when people agree on the why, the conversation shifts. They start to sound more like, well, I might not like it personally, but this is the most sensible approach. Let's go for it. We'll find the money somewhere. Let's give it a try. I'll put my objections aside. I feel like there's a future again. These are statements I've heard at the St. Michael's Church family, and not every church can say that, and that is something to be motivating in of itself. I'll close with the faux change cycle. Perhaps this will help you in other areas of your life. Perhaps you have an idea for church. The stage one is loss. You admit to yourself that regardless of whether or not you perceive the change to be good or bad, there will be a sense of loss of what was. Stage two, doubt. You doubt the facts, doubt your doubts, and you struggle to find information about the change that you believe is valid. Resentment, skepticism, and blame cloud your thinking. Stage three, discomfort. You will recognize stage three by the discomfort it brings. The change and all it means has now become clear and starts to settle in. Frustration and lethargy rule and to possibly take over. The danger zone stage represents the pivotal place where you make the choice to either move to stage four and discover the possibilities the change has presented, or choose fear and return to stage one. Stage four, discovery. Stage four represents the light at the end of the tunnel, perspective, anticipation, and a willingness to make decisions give a new sense of control and hope. You are optimistic about a good outcome because you have choices. Stage five is understanding. You understand the change and are more confident. You think pragmatically and your behavior is much more productive. You begin to make accomplishments. And the final stage is integration. By this time, you have regained your ability and willingness to be flexible. You have insight into the ramifications, the consequences, and rewards of the change, past, present, and future. But be aware, more change is just around the corner. Amen.